Yet another police officer is speaking out against the drug war, this time in the United Kingdom. Former officer Neil Woods worked as an undercover drug cop for 14 years, infiltrating some of the most violent gangs in Britain only to learn his tactics were worsening the drug epidemic.
How much more would we have to try harder to win the war on drugs? I really do not think it's possible. Even if we had a 100-fold increase in the resources and the staff, there would still always be a pushback, because no matter what the policing methods, those policing methods do not reduce the demand. And so with the demand staying the same, it wouldn't matter how much effort we put in, 1,000-fold effort to actually stop the drugs coming into the country, there would always be that pushback because there is too much money involved.
Now, he advocates ending the drug war and decriminalizing drugs as he admits his own role in fueling violence and the proliferation of narcotics. Woods recently spoke with The Independent to make his case and recount the struggles he faced in forcing the British government's drug war. He was first enlisted by the Home Office to tackle the crack cocaine epidemic in the early 1990s, an effort that apparently pleased the Crown. Woods says the tactics he helped develop only exacerbated drug-related crime. The first place I was posted was in Derby, and it wasn't actually that difficult, he says. There were some proper gangsters selling crack and heroin, but they weren't used to the tactic, so although it was a bit scary, it wasn't tremendously difficult because they weren't expecting it. By bringing in new police tactics, however, the dynamics started to change because, as he says, the thing about undercover work is that it doesn't take long for criminals to learn the tactics. Woods recounted several close-call experiences, including one where he was forced to consume amphetamines to prove his credibility. In another, a dealer could sense Woods was a cop and repeatedly pressed him on it before he used intimidation tactics to neutralize the situation. Though he escaped unscathed, he often put his life on the line only to find his work was futile. The ultimate defense against the development of police tactics is an increased use of violence to intimidate the community in which undercover police officers move, he explained, describing the effects of government efforts to curb drug use. As the drug war raged on, drug gangs became even more extreme, and Woods began to realize he wasn't helping. I knew that I couldn't win early on, he told The Independent. But I kept being tempted back into it because I was good at my job. The police departments would say, "Woodsy, we need you. These gangsters are even nastier than the other ones. They're burning people to death. They're using rape as a weapon." Ultimately, however, he accepted his inability to make a difference as a cop. He said it was because of me that organized crime was getting nasty. I was developing the tactics. I put dealers in prison for over 1,000 years and I only disrupted the heroin supply for 2 hours. Policing can't affect the demand, so policing drugs is completely futile. I can't emphasize that enough. More people die and it gets more violent. Drugs have got stronger and cheaper and more varied since the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971.
The common view, especially amongst police, is that criminals are criminals and they will just merely commit other crimes. Well, actually, it's quite a dangerous view to believe that someone is a criminal and that there will always be a criminal.
He also described his experience getting to know drug addicts as he worked undercover. Asked what the biggest misconception about them is, he explained. When I went into policing, I thought addicts had made the mistake of trying drugs and had no willpower to stop. Actually, problematic drug users, or at least all the ones I knew, were self-medicating. Most of the heroin users I knew were self-medicating for childhood trauma, whether physical or sexual. As an undercover officer, I spent a great deal of time getting to know these people. The more I knew someone, the more I could manipulate them. They're like puppets. And they trusted me and saw me as a peer. Describing one female victim of childhood sexual abuse, he explained, to the law, she's a criminal to the law, and I as an agent of the state was there to capture people like that.
And in specifically with the drug supply, I have seen actually how drug dealers are formed, how gangsters are formed. Virtually every drug dealer that I have come across have only been a criminal within the world of supplying drugs, most of them. You get the hardcore sort of middle management gangsters who do commit other crimes, but the vast majority of even the gangsters were tempted into crime because supplying drugs is so easy, it's such an easy crime, because most don't get caught. It's very, very difficult to catch people. It's a very difficult area to police.
Though Woods doesn't advocate a free-for-all on drugs, he does believe the war on them must end. The answer is to regulate drugs and take the power away from organized crime, he argues. The illicit drugs market is worth £7 billion a year. Our communities are ruined by organized crime intimidating populations to protect themselves, so we need to regulate the drug supply like we do with alcohol. He cites Switzerland's establishment of controlled heroin injection centers in the 1990s as an example, an approach recently adopted in Canada, as well. He also cites Portugal, which has had great success with his policy of decriminalization. Woods seeks to live by his principles to undo the damage he helped inflict on drug-riddled communities by speaking out against past failed policies. Woods launched the UK version of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP, an organisation of officers who advocate against the war on drugs. There is also an American LEAP that works toward the same goal. I used to risk my life doing the work because I used to believe I was doing good, he says. Now I realize everything I did only caused harm. Now, I feel duty-bound to continue taking risks because it's a matter of principle.
There would be enormous benefits to the economy in regulating drugs. I mean, first of all, the cost of policing drugs in this country is one of the biggest costs to policing. One estimate that I've seen is about 7 billion a year. I don't know how accurate that is. It's a very difficult thing to quantify, but I think most people, senior management in policing that I've spoken to, would say that it's possibly the biggest cost to policing. It's certainly the biggest cost to policing if you take into account the fact that 50% of acquisitive crime is committed by the small number of people who have a problematic experience with heroin and crack cocaine. If those drugs were treated as a medical regulation, so in other words, if a heroin addict was given heroin in the first instance, before other treatment options were considered, then you would literally eliminate 50% of acquisitive crime overnight. So, and that is an enormous policing cost reduced. If the drugs that it was appropriate to tax, so you had a regulatory model which you could tax them, for example, MDMA, cannabis, those kind of drugs, if they were taxed, it is estimated that it could bring in £7 billion a year to this country in taxation, which is more than was used to bail out the entire Irish economy by the European Union when they crashed. So we're talking enormous amount of money per annum. Of course, we in this country use, in terms of our drug policy, that there is a division between how much is spent on health, how much is spent on policing. In this country, we have an 80% of our drugs budget spent on policing, 20% on health. If you look at the experience of Portugal, where they have put virtually 100% of their drug policy budget on health, they have reduced deaths and all of the health service costs of the harms of drugs. So they've made enormous savings in their health service because of the way that their policy has gone. So it's almost every aspect of public policy in which you save money by switching from a prohibitive policing model to a health model.